Hey, what up, boxing fans? This is the Rope a Dope Report. I'm your host, Chris Carlson. I'm back with another upload. This pertains to the Al Haymon versus Golden Boy Promotions lawsuit. Um, I will put a link to my other last week. I did, well, probably like 10 days ago, I did a more of a detailed video about the paperwork that has been made public about this case. So this is just an update, couple of new things in here, a couple of new facts that I'll mention. And like I said, it's just more of an update. I'll also put the bloodyelbow.com article that I'm getting this information from. The whole time I've really been following a couple of people, but Paul Gift at MMA Analytics, he's been providing a lot of information for this. So, like I said, I'll put the link to that video that I did last week for even more detail. Because I'm not going to get into detail that I already have about this case. But anyway, just going to talk a little bit about some facts that we now know, whereas in the last video we didn't. And basically, the judge, the article is titled "What We've Learned from Al Haymon's Trove of Summary Judgment Filings Against Golden Boy." So basically, Al said, all right, you got a lawsuit against me. Let's put it to a summary judge and see what can actually go to trial. So there were people that went under oath here: Al Haymon, Oscar De La Hoya, Roberto Diaz, Eric Gomez, Kathy Duva, Kerry Davis, Gary Shaw, Michael Ring. So there was, key components, right, to this lawsuit. And a lot of detail about what they said is in that other video as well. I'm not going to kind of rehash that. So basically, Judge Walter is who this judge is, and will be deciding whether there are any genuine disputes of material fact in the Golden Boy case that should proceed to trial. And it says the case that should proceed to trial on March 14th in LA. So that would be obviously next year. If he rules that no reasonable jury could ever side with Golden Boy, the case will be over. Okay, so basically, they're kind of sifting through the things right now, the judge is, and seeing what's going to go to trial potentially. There could be a couple things that they take to the trial, much like the Bob Arum, how they decided to dismiss it and agree upon, and most of it was the venue squatting, and that's in here as well. So anyway, as far as new information and going off this guy's, I guess you could say, expert or professional, knowledge of the case, because he's been following the case a lot. Also, fightopinion.com. I've been using a lot of information from him as well. So basically, the first thing here that I'm going to get to as far as new information, because there was a lot of back and forth. Everybody gave their testimony. We know what the lawsuit's about: an antitrust, a monopoly, just a variety of things. And Golden Boy, and this is kind of newer information anyway, Golden Boy alleges that Haymon forces his boxers to refuse to deal with promotion, because as we know, with Floyd Mayweather, he flipped the model, right? He flipped what was an industry standard. And he basically would pay a fee to Golden Boy. I think it was $3 million. And I'm sure there was other incentives as well. But there was also the fact that they could put Canelo in other fights on the undercard, and they could also get their fighters in fights with Floyd Mayweather, like Ortiz and Guerrero and Maidana and Canelo and all that. So basically, Golden Boy is alleging that they wouldn't allow. There's certain, and that's where I get into more detail in that other video about both sides having stipulations in their contracts, and both of them actually potentially have some dirt. I mentioned that when you dig up dirt in this industry, and like many, but especially one that's not really regulated much, you end up getting dirty. When you dig up a bunch of dirt, you end up getting dirty because Golden Boy has a shady thing in their contracts as well that they've added. Heyman's position, and I'm just reading right from the article, is that he hasn't outright refused to do business with Golden Boy, and he cited, Khan and Canelo, another fight involving Escalando, Leo Santa Cruz, Jesus Ruiz, which was actually January 1st. I remember that fight. I think it was on the undercard. What undercard was that on? Anyway, this is his, instead of, basically, he encourages his fighters to sign single bout agreements rather than long-term promotional agreements. And this is his comments in court about why he decided to do that. He says he gets final say as far as advising, but it is up to the fighter to join a promotional company or not. He hasn't said, no way you can join them. That's what he said anyway. So this is what Haymon says in the court when he arrived, I guess you could say, in the boxing industry. When I began to examine the business relationship then prevalent in boxing, including long-term promotional contracts that were being offered to fighters by promoters, I quickly realized that professional boxers were largely at the mercy of a few promotional or powerful promoters who control access to television and had undue control over boxers. The boxers frequently lacked even basic control of their career, which obviously is very true. To this day, it's very true, right? And that's something that he went to changing, utilizing my business training and long experience in other industries like the music industry, right? It's well known that he flipped that model too, and he realized how much, pull the star of music, and even comedy, but music as well, how much pull they have and how much control they should actually have as well. So he goes on, I sought to turn the boxing promoters into service providers for my clients rather than controlling masters. Boxers have short careers and they take emotional risk and physical risk, of course, each time they step, or enormous risk. Sorry, this print is really, really little. They take enormous risk each time they step in the ring. I felt their business arrangements should be organized to maximize their own earning potentials rather than the promoter. I therefore began advising the boxers I managed not to sign long-term promotional agreements, which I believe disproportionately benefited the promoter rather than the fighter. Instead, I encouraged my clients to sign single bout agreements with a promoter of their choosing for each fight. I've given this advice consistently since I first became a licensed manager. I believe it has served Haymon Sports clients well in recognition of my skills and integrity, advising other clients, or I can't read I think it says our clients. I have been named Boxing Writers Association American Manager of the Year 5 times, including 4 years running. So basically he's saying, what we all know, that he has the long-term deal, and even long-term deals for fighters on networks. It's caused problems. in the industry, and with the fighter as well, and with the network, where the network gets to choose out of these four guys, but they say, well, it can only be these four guys. It can't be these other guys, And sometimes, after a tough fight where the fighter may have just barely won the fight, we'll see more than just one stay busy fight to build to the next fight. Sometimes we'll see an ongoing attempt to keep that boxer undefeated or whatever, the long-term deals with the networks. This is also long-term deal, with the promotional company, which this is all true, obviously. So that's something that, he states, Al Haymon. This is Al Haymon talking, which we don't get, to hear much. And like I said, there was something that was added to the Golden Boy contract as well, and there was new language for the promotional agreement that boxers will not retain, hire, consult with, include, involve any person or entity as a manager, advisor, consultant, or any type of representative not previously disclosed to the promoter, without first obtaining the express written consent or approval of the promoter. So basically, you can't talk to anyone advising your career unless Golden Boy says that's okay. And that's what I mean by digging up dirt. You can find, we've definitely seen in the contracts, there's some language in Al Haymon's contracts that could be seen as, well, I don't know how fair that is to the promoter, but also this is actually fact now that this was added to their agreement with the fighter, which obviously, and there's even more. And if you do it, you'll get damage. They'll get damages. You basically owe them money, that's shady too. And then speaking of Ali Act and everything, and that might actually be the thing that ends up hurting them in a core part of this, this case. Anyway, they go on to talk about the venue blocking. They claim Haymon locked up desirable dates. We all remember the Matisse Provoknikov StubHub thing. And basically, he was saying, they were saying, you can't do that. You can't lock up events or different venues. But also, Haymon claims that putting multiple venues on hold is common practice, and admits there are numerous alternative venues in the greater Los Angeles area. So that is kind of, it's not necessarily hard to prove, but what are you going to get out of it, money-wise, that he did that for that specific case? Not a whole lot, and not $300 million. So there's more, the predatory pricing, which is what we talked about a little bit. Basically, such illegal television promotion results in deliberate and massive financial loss to Haymon defendants. It goes on to talk about, the fact that you're hurting the market. Once they've achieved the monopoly position, they'll seek the market and they'll flip it. So they'll start to get money, but they won't pay. They'll recoup their losses in their, and reverse the financial arrangements, and reap massive profits far exceeding any temporary losses by paying less to the boxers and charging a lot to networks and sponsors. That's going to be hard to prove, the monopoly thing, because it's very tough, to see a large deal on the back end of this experiment, right? So he's saying, so basically they'd have to prove that Haymon right now is about to sign a huge deal that's going to, like he said, have these mass profits, reap these massive profits, and that far exceed their temporary losses. Well, we've heard 425 million, we've heard 600 million, we've heard 900 million that it was invested in this. And he's not about to sign a deal that's going to be worth $2 billion right now. And it's very hard to prove that. You know what I mean? So that's kind of an interesting part. Also, this is something a little bit new that we didn't necessarily know, as far as in the last video I did as well, that originally the original plan was Haymon going to NBC without the time buy structure. And I believe they were still going to use Waddle and Reed for investment, but he basically tried to go to NBC straight up and say, hey, you know, can we make a deal and I get just a little bit of money from you? And this is the whole thing about the PBC thing, and they say, oh, why did he time buy? And a lot of people say, well, if this doesn't work, there's no way that it'll screw any other promoter trying to get money from a network. Well, as we know, the money wasn't there. There wasn't networks knocking on the door, of fight promoters saying, hey, we need your product on our air. A lot of that had to do with HBO originally overpaying and paying high prices to get boxers off a network, which obviously helped the network and help a limited amount of promoters and boxers and managers. But in the end, now that we're here years later, it did reduce the exposure of boxers, no doubt about it. So what HBO did, Haymon is doing a lot. We talk about the overpay and paying a fighter certain amount of salaries, but the only way you're going to get them off premium cable is to pay them like they're on premium cable. And the overhead for that is expensive, and that's part of the whole, trial and error with this thing. So it's going to be hard to judge, but this is something I didn't know. In 2013, Haymon Sports, basically they came up, with the PBC. And they went to NBC and said, hey, we got a proposal for you. Can you broadcast the PBC events in return for a modest fee? NBC, which had been unhappy institutional memories of boxing experience, they said, nah, I'm good. They disregarded this proposal and indicated that it had absolutely no intention of paying, what does that say? Paying a rights fee for boxing. So basically then they went to plan B, in a sense, saying, well, then we're going to do a time buy. And of course, like I said, NBC, CBS, Fox, ESPN, even Bounce TV. And this is something we knew as well. Haymon Sports was able to convince Spike TV to pay a modest fee for PBC. So they are getting paid for some of those fights for the PBC, or probably all of them. And then Haymon puts money on top of the ones that need more backing, because like a guy like Broner to make that kind of money. So that's something that, okay, dude, we actually went, he had this huge, chunk of fighters, clients, right? And he said, hey, I got all these fighters. Can you just give me a little fee and we'll put it on there and get it going? They said, hell no. So there was no other way to do it but to time buy. And if you're going to get investors, they want to go big. And that's part of the whole issue here. When people say, well, if he screws this up, there's no future for network TV. Well, there wasn't a future at the time. As we know, the CBS fight, it had been 38 years since they did a prime time. The others, there was 17 and 20 years for NBC and CBS and the other channels, or some of the other channels as far as prime time. Fox, it had been, I think, since 98 or whatever. I mean, there was no market for it. And guys like Bob Arum, Don King, all these people could have went and tried to do the same thing. And it's going to be tough. I mean, he raised the money to do this. And also another thing, and this is now a fact that we can talk about, and this is something that has been known for quite some time, but never in fact form in the court under testimony. A big thing out there with the media, which has spread to the fans, that Al Haymon, this was a big scam. Now, ultimately, as far as, Ryan Cadwell, who worked with Waddell and Reed and then came on for over a year as someone in charge there, basically like a supervisor to help Haymon go through the process of the whole thing, because Waddell and Reed and Ryan Cadwell had experience with F1 racing. They put in $1.5 billion to F1 racing. So they do have experience in the sports world and television, all that. We know Haymon has some or had some experience with the television as well before boxing. So a lot of people said this is just a big scam. Him and Ryan Cadwell, Al Haymon and Cadwell, conspired to take Waddell and Reed's money. But even in the first article in the Sports Business Journal, Cadwell said there's no way in hell that Waddell and Reed would give him all this money if they're not going to have somebody supervising and at the company to help them through this, which is pretty obvious. If you're going to put in money, you'd like one of your people with experience who was running a fund for you, because that's exactly what he was doing. So he went on full time and then became an advisor, a part-time advisor, and now he's actually back in the same business, running a fund, a mutual fund. So the whole scam thing, and like I said, ultimately maybe they will find proof of it. I don't know this stuff, but to run with the scam thing like some media members did, which ran to the fans, because, most people hate Al Haymon, some for good reason or at least legit reasons, and some none at all, and to say it's a scam, although if you're going to run a scam, why would you say it in an article at the beginning of your scam? He said that straight up, and even when they started talking about the investment and how much money they would need, Al Haymon said, I think we can pull it off for this amount of money. And Cadwell said, no way. We got to be ready for 3 to 5 years. We're going to be the irritational player. I think that was the quote. And the fact that Dan Raphael or Steve Kim or some of these other media members didn't get this original first article interview, basically, with Cadwell and Mike Reed and a couple other people, and some people from NBC as well, instead of citing that article, they've acted like it doesn't exist. Now, I'm not saying they got to say, hey, here's a link to the Sports Journal business, check out this awesome article. But they've also misinformed the public with some of this stuff too, because they didn't get the interview. So they're bitter with that. And like boxing, for boxers and promotional, like I said, there's not a lot of regulation beyond the Ali Act, which gets broken all the time anyway. There's no regulation, obviously, for media. And we know what media in general, not just boxing, but sports and politics and social media has been like anyway. But anyway, one of the things it said in that Sports Business Journal article was that the 15% that Haymon got, which generally kicked in at 100,000 and over to his clients, which is actually either a standard percentage or actually kind of low to take, right, for a manager, especially a promoter that doesn't have a manager, maybe just a lawyer. But anyway, it said in the original detailed article that's easy to Google, boxing's grand stage. It's right there. A lot of people think the Sports Business Journal that you'll have to pay a fee to read it, and most of the stuff on there is, but this is not. You can just Google boxing's grand stage, and you'll see it's under it's the article with the PBC. Because there is an article like in 2011 or something like that, or 2010, that's named that same thing. But anyway, in that article, they clearly said that the investors tied themselves to the 15% of Haymon. So if you're going to put out, let's say, $500 million, and a good chunk of it's going to go to Haymon fighters, that means, theoretically anyway, I don't know the paperwork. We're not in the boardroom, right? But theoretically, if you're tying yourself to a revenue stream, that means the investors, the PBC, right, they own the company technically, or at least a good chunk of it, that they get that 15%, not Haymon. So basically, a lot of people went with, and not just fans, but media too. And I'm not saying Dan Raphael went with this, but many other media members did, that basically it was a big scam to help out his fighters and to make him rich. Well, he didn't take the 15%. In fact, that would have been the most blatant way to break the Ali Act, because you can't know that they're going to make all this money and set it up as what's been called in this paperwork a packager rather than a promoter and an advisor, as we know too, manager, whatever. He's a licensed manager. But if you're taking the 15%, then that would right there be breaking the Ali Act just out front. The paper trail for that would just be so obvious. I never thought he actually would break that, because it'd be so easy to find out, to get these investors to invest all this money, but you're taking 15%, but you got the investors to invest. You see what I mean? And that's where the manager promoter thing, a manager can only, it's basically his best interest should be the fighter. And the promoter, they're trying to get money, and they can't have too cozy of a relationship with a manager, although we always see that. And like I said, a lot of stuff, Golden Boy Promotions, Oscar De La Hoya used to speak of monopolizing just like UFC. He said it straight out in interviews. He made no bones about it. He didn't hide it at all. He said he wants all the dates. Remember when Golden Boy had a deal, an output deal where they get a certain amount of dates with HBO? Well, isn't that breaking the Ali Act and hurting the business? I mean, just like I mentioned, when a fighter signs to HBO, that network has control over that career, and the promoter has control over the career. Well, isn't that breaking the Ali Act? So, like I said, I'm not a guy that tries to take a side. We know Don King, we know Bob Arum, we know Al Haymon, Richard Schaefer, all these people, Oscar De La Hoya, all these people. I mean, boxing used to be ran, a chunk of it anyway, by the mob. It's not about saying, oh, this person's a snake, this person's dirty. They all have dirt on their hands. That's the whole point. But here he is under oath saying, in a further effort to contribute to the PBC chances of success, Haymon Sports has waived its manager and advisor commissions for its boxers competing in the PBC series bouts, except for two occasions involving the offset prior to 2013, which, would be before he got the money. So he was just a manager getting his 15%. And it says prior to 2013, Haymon Sports also frequently waived its commission to assist individual boxers financially. So that means kind of like, I believe that probably means certain situations where he did it, he gave up his 15%, and that happens. That's a very normal practice. Sometimes the promoters will be like, you know what, we're not going to take money out of that, or your manager. More than likely it'll be the promoter. But they said in that article that generally the 15% doesn't kick in until the fighter starts making 100,000 or more. It has been and remain my view that more distribution options means more choices for fans, more opportunities for boxers, and a chance to grow a sport that has been in decline for decades, for exposure. I declare under penalty of perjury that foregoing that I can't read this. Oh, that the foregoing is true and correct, basically. So he signed it and all that. This was on October 31st, 2016. So he's saying under oath that he is not taking the 15%. And, people will say the counter argument, well, he can say anything under oath. Well, okay, but you're also going to, they could look into the financials and see if he's been taking them. It'd be real easy to sit there and start talking to the boxers and go, hey, or even Waddell and Reed, has he given that 15% to you? That type of thing. And like I said, if you're going to do it, if you're going to scam, why would you tell people all about your scam in an article? Al Haymon is a very secretive person, and he doesn't allow people that work for him to talk much about him, right? And that's exactly what this Sports Journal article, they talked about Ryan Cadwell, the guy from Waddell and Reed that joined Haymon Sports for a while and now advises them. They talked to Mike Ring, a long time, I think it's his lawyer, one of his lawyers, and a long-time counterpart with him. And they talked to, I can't remember the guy's name, but it was someone from NBC. And they literally said that the investors are tying their 15% to, as a little revenue stream. So if I put out $100 million in this 1 year, the money that goes to the promotional outfit, or that goes to Haymon fighters, right? We get that 15%. Haymon doesn't get it, we get it. So it's not a huge revenue stream, but at least you have some money coming in to go along with the ads and tickets and yada yada yada. And we know the overhead has been very limited in that they didn't, we know they've been having, this whole thing was a big experiment to see if they could do it. And ultimately, after like 4 to 6 months and even 2 months into it, many people in the industry already said it was gone. It was dead. So, at Rope It Over Radio on the podcast and even on YouTube, I've never claimed to know what the ultimate thing. If they could land a deal of a modest deal and then work from there and then maybe get a bigger deal, or, they even say in this by 2018, if they haven't done enough to warrant this new model of network TV and basic cable, it probably won't work. And they said 3 to 5 year plan, so we'll see. Like, ultimately, a lot of people claim that it was dead this last fall. They've been saying PBC was dead for, like I said, almost like 2 months into it, since March 2015. I already heard so many people, like Kathy Duva, her daughter Nicole Duva, so many people within the boxing community, especially media members, And that obviously turns into fans saying the same thing, that it's dead, it's this and that. And in the financial stuff, as far as the holdings and how much money was invested, we really actually don't know exactly every little thing, because even it's still not public just yet. We don't even know the exact amount. In fact, in this paperwork, they don't have to release the exact amount. And there is another, basically, some investors into this holding, right, for Waddell and Reed. They're suing Waddell and Reed, saying, basically going off of this Golden Boy, in a sense, going off of this Golden Boy promotional lawsuit, saying, well, if this was a scam, illegal business, because they're breaking the Ali Act, then Waddell and Reed had no business in the first place to even invest in this. And a lot of what's going to happen potentially in that lawsuit has something to do with this and what can be done here. So basically, just to wrap this video up, this guy that I'm getting the information from, the bloodyelbow.com, like I mentioned, his name is Paul, what is it, Paul Gift? Let me make sure I'm getting this right. And he's been getting a lot of information the whole time. Yeah, Paul Gift. If you want to follow him at Twitter, at MMA Analytics. Okay? So he's more of the business side of sports, basically. And in the end, like I said, there's a lot more detail. There's a lot more information that I dug up, or I didn't dig up. I just read. I just learned and researched from a couple of sources that I've mentioned in the documents with Gary Shaw and Kerry Davis, and just a variety of stuff. So I have detailed that in that other video. So maybe I'll put a link to that video with the more detail as far as the testimony, because I'm not going to go over it again in this video. This was all about new information in an update. So basically, right now, it's in the mode of deciding what parts of this lawsuit potentially could go to trial. That's what the judge is trying to figure out right now. In the nutshell on this guy, here we go. This is his last statement, this Paul guy, okay, for bloodyelbow.com. He says, last week, Judge Walter vacated a hearing on Haymon's motion for summary judgment that was scheduled November 28th. It was scheduled this Monday. He'll make his decision on the submitted filings, and that decision could come at any time. So basically, instead of having, like, I guess, their final arguments in a sense and more talk, they felt like, the Judge Walter felt like, okay, we got all this information, we got all this testimony. You know, Golden Boy has their experts, which consisted of Gary Shaw and, you know, Kathy Duva and others, and Haymon had his experts. And so they all got to say, and obviously Haymon as well, and Oscar as well. And I've gone over some of those quotes, so you should watch that other video if you're interested. So the decision could come at any time. Should the full case or parts of it progress to trial, the pressure will mount on Haymon to settle. So we could see a settlement. We could see a dismissal settlement. You never know, like we did with Bob Arum in Top Rank versus Al Haymon. Or maybe they will go to trial. But, you know, there could be settle. Then again, that's what this guy says, Haymon's positioning in this case seems to be on the stronger side based on the documents that have thus far been made public. The seemingly terrible performance of Waddell's, you know, the fact that they've invested this money, and as far as the holdings go, we don't know actually how much money out of those holdings that have been invested in just the PBC. We actually don't know that yet. Now, the court knows it. The judge knows it. And I guess you could say technically both lawyers, and I'm assuming Golden Boy would know it too, because they would have, representatives there. And that information probably can be spread, but I don't know, because they blacked out the amount in the paperwork. For declassified documents through the government, you see a lot of blacked out stuff. So we don't know the exact amount. So basically, this guy says that there's a potential that some of it could go to trial, potentially, and he could just settle. But he says that right now it favors Haymon based off the documents that have been made public. And if you look at it just from the outside, like, I'm not a lawyer, I never claimed to be. And just, we hear about frivolous lawsuits all the time. Some of it is corporations saying, oh, the frivolous lawsuits, when it's some of them are real, of course. But of course, there's plenty of people that sue for all sorts of different stuff, right, in our country. So right now, he's saying that Haymon has the strong point in this. And right now, there's not going to be, unless the judge says, I want to hear some more information, the stuff that's made public is what the judge has to go off of. So this decision could come down anytime. So it'll be interesting to see where this thing goes. But right now, it does look, based off the information, based off some of these people, their expert opinion, I guess you could say, and based off just, I've talked to some lawyers, because I have some friends that are lawyers, and there are some, I guess you could say, like Luda Bella. Yes, he sides with Haymon in this, but remember, when you talk about the Ali Act in monopolizing the market, it was any promoter had they had all ability and every right to go get investors to invest in boxing. Just nobody actually did it. Somebody, we've seen promoters come in the sport, invest their own money. We just saw that. We're seeing it with Jay-Z, 50 Cent, plenty of other people through the years, not just lately, but through the decades. But no one's ever gotten an investment firm to create hundreds of millions. And that's what they say in that, they say the short term and the midterm is ugly. It's nasty and it's tough. And that's why nobody's ever invested it. The long term, there's so much potential there, right? But the problem with the reason why networks didn't want to, when push comes to shove, the reason why a network wouldn't jump at the opportunity was past dealings, right? But not just that, but they see the amount of money they got to pay these fighters on HBO and Showtime, and they say, no way. There's no way we can do this. And the root of all of it, in my opinion, is because boxing is so separate. And that's why that UFC model that even Oscar De La Hoya spoke of, and they spoke of it in some of these documents, as far as a league, right? They even talked about a league that they'd have a base pay for the fighters and then incentives in there as far as how bigger you got and how much your fan base and sponsorship and all that, right? So the fact that the reason why UFC could get the deal is because they had Spike TV as an outlet on basic cable to put on a lot of their product, right? And then they had a growing pay-per-view market that started blowing way up, right? But the thing is, it's a league. Dana White makes the rankings. He makes the matchmaking. So, and remember, the UFC and MMA in general is not under the Ali Act. You got a guy in Dana White that is the promoter, the manager, the everything. He's the sanctioning body. He's everything. So if someone does that in boxing, like Haymon, you know, putting together all this stuff, they say this guy is trying to monopolize. He's bad for the sport. He's evil. But that's exactly what Dana White did. And there's no, if a fighter doesn't want the fight, then he's not going to get the fight. And of course, that'll hurt him in the long term, just like it does in boxing, right? But the fact that there's a Cold War going on that is just now starting to thaw at a mid-level fight, in a prospect level fight, even between Al Haymon and Bob Arum. The fact that they're on the phone talking is a positive, but when you have about 3 or 4 or 5, big promoters in the sport that basically dominate the sport on the high level, that the ones that are making the money, they're going to look out for their own. And that's a natural thing. I'm not ripping Bob Arum or Golden Boy or Al or Schaefer or Eddie Hearn or Frank Warren. I'm just saying that's natural. But from a television network executive standpoint, why would they want to deal with all this shit? Why would they want to deal with it? And why would they buy a product that they don't know if they can make the fights? Because it'll be up to the other people. And that's why you market it as and brand it as a PBC, right? And you have a lot of, a lot of people say, well, Haymon represents too many people. I hear that. But you know what? There's no way he would have gotten this investment if he didn't represent that many people. It's clear as day. In fact, there's more quotes from people who matter at NBC in that Sports Business Journal article that you barely hear any boxing writer, let alone fan, talk about. There's so much information out that has been misinformed because they didn't get the interview. That's what it came down to. So, which is pretty damn ridiculous in my mind. So anyway, think about it. He couldn't get the investment without having a lot of fighters, because then you have a lot of fighters. That means you can make a lot of fights and you're not limited. And so that's why he acquired so many more fighters in a short amount of time, because he needed to be able to fill dates, right? It's common sense. Now we can sit there and argue about, and it's a good argument. It's some of it's not up for debate. Some of it's a very good point. Some of it's up for debate about, too much. The first year, there was a lot of boxing. Some of the weeks were too much. I remember there was a week where there's 4 events in one a week, and it took away from it. So they overkilled some of it. But then when they, just like this fall, when they decided not to compete with college football on the regular like they had in 2015, then people were saying, well, where the hell are you? What the hell's going on? And it's not, you can't win for losing. It's not that easy. It's not that black and white. There's plenty of things to complain about, but that's in boxing. And I'll say it, I've said it plenty of times, that the amount of mismatches that people talk about as far as Al Haymon and the PBC, so many people, and I'm talking about media, not just fans, say it's mostly mismatches. That's bullshit. It's not been mostly mismatches. And stay busy fights to build to another fight has been a thing in boxing for years now. We've seen it. I mean, just look at the HBO this year main events. Just look at it. I'm not talking about the promotional company main events. Look at their main events. Look at a lot of their main events. A lot of stay busy fights. A lot of mismatches. And it's funny because some of these perceived mismatches that get right away perceived as a bad matchup, they become competitive fights or even upsets. And I'm not saying PBC only makes great fights. That's not what I'm saying. But for the people that wanted to say In 2015, he should have just made the best fight the best. So you're telling me in like a 6 to 8 month process, you're going to put every one of your fighters in a tough fight and just blow your load right away. There's no way anybody would do that. First of all, there's not enough depth in boxing to do that. It just doesn't work. Now, the stylistic matchup, that's the debate, and that's the legitimate stuff we can talk about. And on the Rope A Dope Radio podcast, we talk about it all the time. We've dogged the Austin Trout going against, what's his name, Twinkle Fingers, right? The Peter Quillen going against, on NBC, going against that Chippendale dancer. Some of Stevenson's opponents. Yeah, those are, we just got done ragging on the Samuel Vargas opponent for Danny Garcia. That was some bullshit, right? That was some bullshit. I think the biggest thing about this, if you're going to stay busy, fans and media members want boxers to stay busy, but then they only want to see them against the best fighter. Well, those two can't go hand in hand, just to be honest with you. But to stay busy, the stylistic stay busy fight is very important. And I think it's something that the PBC and others need to improve on, but we've seen some improvement. I've noticed on Twitter and on YouTube and forums that everybody is now a professional matchmaker. Whatever you think about Al Haymon or Schaefer or any of these people, Bob Arum, Oscar, DeBella, any of these people, Eddie Hearn, Frank Warren, the dudes from the past, Don King, plenty, the mob running a chunk of boxing, whatever you think about them, instead of worrying about, oh, this guy's crooked. Well, guess what, dude? When you make a lot of money and you're in big business, you're going to be a little crooked. And especially in our country, because the laws allow you to be crooked, right? They do. You can legally be crooked in a lot of ways. So I just see a lot of professional matchmakers nowadays, and they perceive a matchup to be shit, and so it goes down in history as shit. And that's something I'd never seen following boxing, especially closely following and having a podcast and writing and all that and covering events over the years, the last 7 years or whatever. I've never seen that part. I'm not saying that media members and fans can't have an opinion on an announced fight. Of course, that's called being a fan. I'm not saying that. Some people, when I've brought this argument up, they've ranted right to then, oh, so I can't have an opinion? No, dummy. Of course you can have an opinion on a fight. That's the whole point. But to act like a professional matchmaker and to nitpick every little thing about it, but not nitpick and be a professional matchmaker to others. We're just now seeing HBO. You notice how when Showtime with the Super 6 started gaining momentum, it started putting quality stuff on. It was beating, as far as quality, not ratings, but at quality, Showtime was beating HBO. And they peaked in 2013 when they got the Golden Boy roster, right? When Golden Boy and Al Haymon got kicked off HBO. And for a while there, that lasted until about mid-2014, where they were beating them for quality. And you notice that all of a sudden it made HBO go, oh my God, we got to start worrying about quality. We can't just, star build. And so the competition, it was good. That's a positive thing because HBO started getting their shit together. But you notice when fall 2014 happened, where it was just shit filler on Showtime, and then they just in 2015, Showtime didn't have enough product. Some of their product was good, but it just wasn't, it was a big fall off considering what they had been, the level they had built it up to, clearly. And then HBO went back to beating Showtime in quality, right? Well, once they started doing that, they started getting lazy again. Look at from about mid-2015 until this point. Now, they closed well this year. They closed well last year. Traditionally, HBO closes well. But if you look at the matchups this year, look at Luis Ortiz's two opponents on HBO. Look at the fact that some of these fights, and it had to do with the budget cut. I understand that, but some of it's a waste of budget. I mean, look at on normal HBO, Hank Lundy and Crawford, a fight with Kovalev Pascal, the rematch that not a lot of people needed to see based off the first fight, and Pascal in the summer the year before against Gonzalez looking real faded. Now, I'm not going to complain about that fight because, like, I wouldn't go out of my way to complain about that fight, although it turned out how a lot of people felt, you know. Look at Gennady Golovkin. Wade, an unproven dude. Wade, you're going to put – just look at it. Just look at what they've done in their main events, and their best fights have been on HBO pay-per-view. Kovalev Ward, Crawford Postal. They had a great September 10th. You notice how all of a sudden the triple headers, once Showtime's, their product went down because the PBC took most of the best fights, obviously, at that time. Notice how their triple headers went away almost. They actually, because you saw triple headers and even quadruple headers from Showtime. So competition's good, and now this year, we're starting to see a change of the guard when it comes to quality. In March, when Showtime made that big announcement, they put on some quality fights, right? The Wilder and Povetkin, that hurt that they didn't get that. But now, the perception is starting to change on HBO. You see that. Perception can or cannot be reality. But on Twitter and on Facebook and social media and boxing forums, a lot of the time, perception is reality because that's what people think. Now, you can change that perception, and I do believe that Showtime, if you look at what they've done now in this last announcement and what they have on paper, HBO is not going to be able to compete with that right now. And if they are, that means they're going to have to step up their game. Now, luckily, Golovkin and Canelo didn't fight because that gave us some fights on paper. It gave us Walters and Lomachenko. When they put that on paper, I'm going to give them credit for that fight. I know how it turned out one-sided, and what Walters did was ridiculous. But it's good that Showtime's actually putting on quality product again because it's going to make HBO check themselves. And we can get that 2013 year was an awesome year for boxing. And it really woke up HBO. But then they went back to sleep once Showtime fell off. So anyway, it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out. But like I said, the professional matchmaker, it's almost like the result of what happens in the ring now doesn't count because a lot of these perceived mismatches have turned out to be good fights. And like I said, some of them that we've ripped have turned to be upsets. So I say just give every chance a fight or every fight a chance. Some fights, screw them. Like the Danny Garcia, Samuel Vargas, I understand that. Now, I like the undercard that they tried to build and built, but still, F that. I understand. I'm not saying you can't say F that to some matches, but you cannot think, like, I guess when it turns out, like, how many times does it need to turn out to be competitive for you to realize, and especially media members, because there's the one who, misinform people, that you're not a professional matchmaker, right? Anyway, I'm really interested to see if parts of this lawsuit go to trial. Anyway, you can check it out. Check me out on Twitter. Follow me at Rope-A-Dope Radio. You can check out the Rope-A-Dope Radio podcast anytime. We really had our say with Lomachenko and Walters last week, or Wednesday, I should say, last night. You can check it out on iTunes. You can subscribe there and blogtalkradio.com/Rope-A-Dope Radio. Peace.